Gringo, what's that song you're playing?
It's Mariachi Mexico, otherwise known as Spaghetti West Auckland, by the Pagliaccis. I see you and you're going far away to a little home, and I want to come with ye and ASS. And your ASSAY, and your ASS, and your ASSAY. Mariachi Mexico, Mariachi.
Edition of the Dark Occulted Mysticism show, co-hosted by myself, Vinny Eastwood, and my good man Freighter X over there with the beard and the glasses. And we have another man with a beard and glasses as well, who's our very special guest today, who is Mark Passio from What on Earth Is Happening.com, coming at us live from the fully Philly Masonic Valley of Philadelphia. Welcome to the show.
Vinny, it's great to be here.
Now, you're a man who is very, shall we say, clued up in the ways of what we would call natural law, and being a former priest at the Church of Satan offers a unique perspective on the world around us and how it's truly run, and such a fitting guest for the Dark Occulted Mysticism show that we've had him scheduled for a number of months to this point, and waiting it in eager anticipation. So is there anything else about yourself you'd perhaps like to preface for the audience who are not familiar with your work?
Well, I think as far as my background is concerned, that's really all the time we need to spend on it. I think you did justice in saying that the forte that I really cover is natural law, helping people to understand what the laws of that govern the consequences of behavior are and how they operate in our lives, so that we can make better informed choices to align our decisions and our actions with those laws, so that we don't generate self-inflicted suffering. I mean, that's really what I consider the absolute essence of the bulk of my work. So that does sum it up.
Now, Freda, you yourself personally, we've kind of developed a sort of a relationship with Mark as one who is very knowledgeable of the cult, much like yourself. And you get this kind of camaraderie, this sort of colleague status, even though you don't work for the same organization, but you apply similar pieces of knowledge in different fields, and in fact do events together and such, right?
Yeah, I guess it was 2 years ago now that I first heard Mark talking with a group, a panel discussion on another show. And right away, I could tell right away that Mark had a great understanding of the principles that are encoded within the Western esoteric systems. And the thing that I found remarkable is that he was not a traditional initiate as I had come to know them. You know, he was somebody from a very different sort of background with his experiences. So that was really remarkable to me, because he had such a grasp of this, and yet it was coming from a different angle, and yet he had a very positive understanding, very proactive, solutions-oriented message, which is to me, very essential to the material. And Mark and I are both going to be speaking at a function that he had success organizing in 2011, was the Free Your Mind Conference in Philadelphia. We're doing one April 25th through the 27th, 2013 in Philadelphia. And one of the titles of it is, it's mind control. What is it, Mark? Help me out, buddy.
A conference on consciousness, mind control, and the occult.
And that's the point that I wanted to stress, is that it says "and the occult" at the end. Now, that might seem kind of remarkable to some people, sort of maybe even a little out of place, but in fact, no, because as we're looking at it, it is from this angle of a positive application of the wisdom and the system encoded within, that I believe, and I'm sure Mark would agree, but I'll let him speak for himself, I believe is the epitome of how the dark occulted mysticism in our world, the globalists, have taken these and reapplied them in a negative and used them to captivate everyone, to, if you will, enchant the world. It's the same principles, it's just being applied with a negative intent. And
that's exactly
so
right.
That's what I picked up on with Mark. He definitely had a really powerful grasp of the material. And so, yeah, you're right. We kind of have, sort of gotten together on a couple of different projects. We hope to get together on a couple more in the future. The Free Your Mind Conference is one of them. I also spent some time in Philadelphia last weekend. I went with Mark to the Truth, Freedom, Prosperity documentary discussion group. And that was really interesting because it was a chance to meet with folks, and we watched an hour-long documentary dealing with the Bilderberg, which the subject matter is a movie called The Turning Point. It's a new media discussion concerning, basically it was exciting because it had 20 different media sources all outside the Bilderberg from 2012 meeting, coming at it from all their own agendas, it was really like democracy in action. And then to have a group of people willing to come and gather and talk about it was also extremely exciting, I thought.
The gentleman from Press for Truth, I think, did a great job on that documentary, and that's why I chose to screen it at the Truth, Freedom, Prosperity documentary evening last month, or earlier this month. I actually, that was at the end of November. That was November 29th. So I think they did a great job in really expressing how this is the new media, the open source media, the cell phone cameras or high-def cameras, and you streaming or YouTube streaming and getting the word out there without the totally controlled old-school mainstream media that is bought and paid for, telling people what the globalists want them to hear. I thought it was refreshing to see that kind of like what I call it open source media out there covering this event and reporting honestly and openly to the American public and getting the word out there. Yeah. So, in that sense, that documentary was very encouraging. Mm-hmm. But I'd like to briefly go back to what Frater spoke about at the beginning, talking about, in general, the knowledge that we're bringing forward as part of Free Your Mind 2, this conference that we have coming up in Philadelphia in April. It is about the occult, but it's about bringing that which has been hidden, which, of course, many times I've endlessly gone over that the word occult simply means hidden from sight. That's all it means. It is derived from the Latin occultare, which means to hide, to conceal, or to keep secret. That verb in Latin is derived from the noun oculus in Latin, which means eye. So it is dealing with matters that are unseen. That's what occult simply means. That which is hard to see or which has been veiled or deliberately hidden from sight. What we're doing, the work that we're doing, I consider us de-occultists. We've studied the materials that are contained in different schools of occultism, and we're bringing them forward. We are breaking that knowledge, that wisdom out onto the world so that people can benefit from it. We're distributing that information freely and openly in an open source manner so that people can decide for themselves whether they are ready to take that into themselves, to integrate it, and to act upon it, and to ultimately help to better themselves and the world as a result of having taken in knowledge that has previously been hidden from them, from all of humanity since time immemorial. And this differential in knowledge, in hidden knowledge, is what has enabled the powers that be to hold on to their power for so long. They have turned that differential in knowledge into a differential in power. And we're trying to level that playing field by doing the work that we're doing, acting as de-occultists is what I like to call the work that we do.
So this is kind of like the de-occulted mysticism show.
Exactly.
You could say so.
Exactly. And that's the great thing. I'm really excited, guys, about what's going on right here and now, because like Mark coined once again, a phrase that I first heard Vinny use was reclassifying what we're doing here as the new media, and Mark brought it up too, and that's the exciting, and in keeping with synchronicity, it's something we're all becoming aware of, that this is a barrier that we're breaking, but it's like the most exciting. I love the term de-occultism, or even disenchantment, because we're disenchanting our minds. We're waking up to the reality of things, which is a greater reality beyond. And I like the idea that we're not even offering a specific way for people. What we're just saying is that, hey, there is other ways. You don't have to be a slave to the paradigm that's held you and kept everyone, trapped in this fear of shortage and scarcity, artificial shortage and scarcity, and being manipulated through that, and the terrorism and the manipulations that everyone experiences on a regular basis. Every move we make seems to be based in fear, and so the systems of the occult, the first thing that they do is they empower the individual with options. They place the responsibility of their soul and the protection from disfigurement that will occur in this culture if you let it. They place that responsibility in the hands of the individual, and that is the key.
I see the occult and the mainstream media and what's happening now with the rise of the new media kind of as an analogy. A young boy keeps getting beaten by his father until such time as he gets to about 16 and he's got height and muscle mass behind him that he can actually beat his own father up, and suddenly he finds his father doesn't beat him anymore. That's what's happening now. We're now of the capability of beating the mainstream media up back.
Yeah, that was one thing that was emphasized in this movie, too, The Turning Point, which can be found on YouTube, anybody who wants to check it out. They were talking about, before it took a media crew and thousands of dollars of budget and, expensive equipment and know-how and training to do what can be done with one phone now, one live stream phone. So that's why you had 20 different independent media sources all at the Bilderberg meeting, bullhorning every single person coming in that door, identifying each global elitist, scumbaggery, as Vinny would say, identifying the scumbags as they're rolling in. And so it was exciting because that's the kind of secrecy that needs to be revealed. It needs to have the covers pulled off. Everybody needs to stand up and say who they are. They have to acknowledge their presence and acknowledge what their intentions are and why they are there. This is the bottom line, is we're dealing with people who are, I've heard Mark speak about it many times. They're already violating the tenets of their office in most cases because they're meeting in conflict of interest with some of the very business interests who benefit from their, coercion or, collusion, as the case may be, or conspiring together in the same interests in the same regions of marketing. It's totally a conflict of interest. It's illegalities.
Yeah, in the United States it's called the Logan Act to prevent such power brokers from meeting in secret, because of the corruption that it breeds. And I believe in Japan it's called the Shogun Act. That was a joke.
That's what we count on you for. You're the Costello to our Abbott over here, I guess, tonight.
It's basically an espionage act. These people are guilty of treason. It's a high crime, and nobody seems to even be talking about it.
That's one thing we learn is in this movie. Again, they showed Sorry, go ahead, Mark. Continue.
Yeah, until people bring this forward enough out into the light of day, that's what the job of the media is supposed to do when corruption is taking place, to expose it. And that's what the new media is doing, because the old guard is not doing its job. So, that's why I do find it encouraging the kinds of technology that are available for new and open source media today are more powerful than ever, and they're placing tools in the hands of people who are going to use them for the right reasons and not be co-opted and not be corrupted by a paycheck or by any loyalties to a corporation or some sort of a corporate dynasty. And they're going to put the word out there in a open and honest sense to alert the people about what they need to know that's taking place around them. And that's the time that we're living in. It's a time of revealing, of de-occulting, of unveiling. This is truly apocalyptic. These are truly apocalyptic times. But again, this is another word that is very misunderstood. It doesn't mean anything necessarily catastrophic. It means simply the lifting or the removal of the veil. Apocalyptine in Greek. Apo means to remove or to take away, and calyptine means to conceal or to veil or to hide. So apocalyptine, apocalypse, which is the ancient Greek, is what the etymology of that word is based upon, actually means to lift the veil or to remove the veil, to take away that which has been obscuring something so that the truth can be seen. In that sense, the word apocalypse is very uplifting and positive, because that's exactly what needs to be done with these psychopathic so-called elitists, these globalists. When the light is shined upon them, they scatter like the cockroaches that they are, these psychopaths. And that's what we have to keep doing, is shining the light on them and their activity, so more and more people wake up and become streetwise to their methods of manipulation. And so those methodologies don't work. They're non-effective as we go forward, and we could start to undo the damage and start to heal from all the damage that these psychopaths have caused to the body of humanity.
Now, randomly, does this have anything to do with Harry Belafonte? As in Calypso, as in Apocalypto, Is there even some kind of... is there any connection there between Calypso and Apocalypto? I don't know.
Mel Gibson?
Very well
maybe
could
Mel
be.
Gibson?
Mel Gibson, Apocalypto. That was a great movie.
I'm thinking maybe Mel Gibson connection there. I don't know.
See, I always thought the Apocalypto was a type of Spanish dance.
Oh, really? Yeah, the Apocalypto. That's it's that done on the Day of the Dead, the Day Deus Morte.
It
they
must
all wear
be
black, Apocalypto, and then they pull off their coats and they have white underneath. It's a revealing dance.
Yeah.
But Mark's what he's saying, the great revealing. That is clearly what we're dealing with. Even when you look at the material in the non-canonical text in the Bible, they have different books that are called, like the Apocalypse of John or the Apocalypse of James. These are references to the Revelations of John, the Revelations of James. And when we look at what's going on right now, this pattern of what we would consider new thought movement in America, where new words are being considered, like synchromystic or
scumbaggery.
Any kind of a couple of new words that I'm using, stereoma and pleroma. These are old Greek terms, but they're being made new now when we consider the idea of mind parasite intrusion upon our psychology, creating a false reality in which we embrace and consider real, and actually operate and base our moral judgments upon this false conception of reality. And that's a word, stereoma, that's used to apply this principle, along with another word, what we'd call pleroma, which means the manifestation of the all. Beside that, in spite of that false reality, the pleroma exists beyond that. And so it's an exciting time of just, of considering new ideas and new words, new concepts, like new media, for example, and thinking about what that means. Yes, in fact, the old guard has been compromised. We cannot rely upon what used to be considered one of the aspects of democracy. When I was raised as a child, the media, what was it called? The fourth estate or the fifth estate? It was, what was that?
The
fourth
estate,
estate, right?
I believe.
Yeah, because you had the three branches of government,
Right.
and then you had the media, which was supposed to be the buffer, the way to keep government authentic by asking the hard questions, by
Right.
confronting the leadership on their choices, so that they would have to be held accountable. Responsibility and accountability has left the American political debate.
All political
one takes
debate.
accountability. No one takes responsibility.
Yeah, it
Well,
doesn't
when you
matter.
have enough money to basically offer anybody an immoral choice, and the ethics of a people are degraded to a point where money is their value system and has essentially become their god, then of course people aren't going to think twice when they're offered a huge sum of money and told to look the other way, or to not report on something, or to just ignore something of major significance. Most people will do that. They just don't have any allegiance to truth. They don't have any allegiance to the public. They just will take the paycheck and look the other way and pretend that nothing is wrong, when ultimately that decision is ultimately putting not only them into chains, but it's putting their children into chains.
Yeah.
And that's a great segue, Mark, to a topic I wanted to bring up, because I know that you're currently addressing on your show the topic of psychopathy, as most especially the idea of original psychopathy and its manifestation within our culture, or primary psychopathy,
Yes.
as you would,
Yes.
And I think it's also important for us to, as we've been defining definitions already this evening, let us look closely at the definitions of, violence and aggression, and how we understand these within our social structure. Even in New Zealand, I'm sure Vinny could corroborate this, that there we have the social pacifism movement, from the 60s and 70s and 80s, which basically equaled disempowerment for the people, as far as I'm concerned, and how that's connected to law enforcement and psychopathy. So, Mark, please chime in on what the material you've been handling lately on your show.
Sure. Well, I've been going over the difference between primary and secondary psychopathy and the characteristics that are inherent to the psychopathic personality. A primary psychopath is essentially someone who is born without the capacity to experience the normal range of human emotions, cannot empathize with any other living person. It's not a choice for them, and it is not created by conditioning factors. It's not created by environmental conditions. This is a actual disorder within the human genome that creates this defect in the limbic system of the brain. The limbic brain, or the midbrain, the middle chamber, if you will, of the human brain, of the complexes of the brain, regulates human emotion. It makes human emotion possible by generating the neuropeptides and other neurotransmitters that go into the bloodstream. They're secreted from the brain and go into the bloodstream and have an effect inside the human physiology as they're pumped through the circulatory system. This makes us be able to feel something in the physiology, in the body, when we take an action upon another human being, or around another human being. A primary psychopath, it does not have that capability. It is amputated. It would be like a person born without arms. There is no ability to empathize or feel. Whether they wanted to or not, it's irrelevant. It's a genetic condition from birth, and they don't have that capacity. So again, it's like an amputation. Yes, they have the midbrain, but it is not electrochemically working. It is not functioning in the way that a normal human being's brain functions to generate those chemicals and electrochemical signals that are necessary to actually feel human emotion. So it's a broken body computer, a broken part of the body computer. Like I describe it as, maybe putting the wrong component into a computer. Well, yeah, it's still in the computer, but it's not going to function if it's not made to work with a particular motherboard, for instance. Okay, you can put a video card in a motherboard, but if it's not designed for that motherboard, it may fit in there. If you don't have a driver for it, you're not going to have the interaction, and you're not going to get the display that you want on the screen. Well, this is how a primary psychopath's brain, how they are born. They're born with a part of the brain not working properly. And there's no conditions that are going to override that. The defense against the psychopath, the tactics of defense are very simple. There's really only two. Either attempt to isolate the psychopath from you, or isolate yourself from the psychopath, or direct confrontation, directly having to deal with physically the psychopath, which a lot of people don't want to even think of. They don't want to even turn their mind toward that possibility or eventuality. And I think they're going to really need to, because of the extent that the second part of psychopathy has really invaded our world, and that's secondary psychopathy. And secondary psychopathy is psychopathy that is created from environmental conditions and factors in someone's daily experiences, chronically engaged in certain types of behaviors, activities, influences, and the same general type of deadening, if you will, or atrophying of the midbrain's capacity to generate the neurochemical and electrical activity that is going to allow one to feel a true range of human emotions. So secondary psychopaths will often display the same personality traits and characteristics as a primary psychopath, but the difference being that a primary psychopath is born that way, a secondary psychopath is actually made that way chronically over time through the environmental conditions and factors that they have been exposed to in their daily lives.
I was listening to the
yes.
radio just the other day, and there was a ambulance officer who was on there, and he talked about experiences with other ambulance officers who've been in it for 30 years, and how it's mostly people with an overabundance of empathy that get into emergency medical work and things of that nature because they want to help people. And after about 30 years of this kind of stuff, there'd be times where they just go, die. I don't care, and just kind of lose it all, like they're burning out, sort of thing.
That's funny you would bring that up, Vinny, because I was going to mention that, my family employs a lot of former law enforcement and first responders, retired and also part-time while they're still engaged in contracts with the local, municipalities. So in my life, I've come into contact with a lot of former law enforcement, like guys that are retired from the police force after 25, 30 years, and they're now on pensions and they're working an hourly job, basically taking it away from an unemployed younger guy, and while they're still collecting a pension, they're also working this hourly wage, but they happen to have a buddy hookup, because they're friends with my father who owns the company, but I was able to sit in on a lot of back and forth in the break room kind of discussions, and I was just shocked at the level of what I think Mark could classify as this primary and secondary psychopathy being engaged in a very general sort of laissez-faire kind of like casual back and forth of like bigotry and racism and misogynism and sexism. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking to myself, these are the kind of people I don't want anywhere near my family when we need first responders and emergency responders, because they're just like horrifying, really.
Hey, you know what?
Outwardly.
I also would like those people to be banned from bars. You know how they banned smoking in bars because of the secondhand cigarette smoke? I think they should ban psychopaths from bars because of the secondhand psychopathy.
Vinny, I'll go you one better. I think psychopaths should be banned from Earth.
Well, no. We could have extractor fans in the bars so that when a psychopath kind of goes in like a jet jet exhaust kind of thing, like, ah!
It sucks up the Jetson tube. You know what I mean?
And then incinerates them and releases them as a harmless puff of smoke.
As a mulch into the local fauna.
I think it's important to qualify what we're even really talking about when we talk about psychopathy for people that may not have studied the condition. Anyone can look it up. In general, in psychological or psychiatric terminology today, they call it sociopathy. That's the euphemized term for psychopathy. I prefer to continue to call it psychopathy because I think it more accurately stresses that it is a pathology of the psyche, of the mind and soul, ultimately.
Mark,
And
could I
yes,
interject just for a moment?
sure.
Because you're bringing it right back to where I wanted to pick it up, and that is to really examine. I mean, when I hear you talking about this, the primary and secondary, the first thing that pops into mind is like, who would benefit from these sort of individuals in our culture and society? Why would this? How could this, even though it's broken, it has use to those who would sow discord and would sow fear and terror in the general population by, I mean, I've heard recent accounts of various serial killers accounts of saying that they were re-released back into the population, early on in their killing careers because the local police departments and police forces wanted a higher death count for that movie of the week bestseller that they were trying to work out already with contracting on these. So they had like active known about serial killers out there in the general population, building up the numbers before they brought them in so that they could get a bigger, contract or whatever. I mean, that's crazy.
It's always going to benefit people who are looking for more and more control. And ultimately, the people who are looking for the most control are the psychopaths that are ultimately in control of all of the institutions on the planet.
There it is. And that's what I was trying to get to. When you look at the work of John Lash in his Not in His Image and metahistory.org, who I quote him extensively because he really has a grasp on this. He talks about the victim-perpetrator dynamic and how all the world religions, the Abrahamic religious mental infestations on the human species, all engage in this victim-perpetrator dynamic. In which a person takes the role of one or the other. And your primary and secondary psychopathy always takes the role of the perpetrator. And you know what? The victim is the hapless, willing sacrifice that lays their neck on the altar to have it opened up wide and their blood spilled across the stone over and over again ad nauseum.
This is parallel with some of the work that I have done on the abuse victim cycle and how traumatic events usually continue the cycle of either playing the abuser or playing the role of the victim. And it's very difficult to break out of that cycle because people are identified with either one role or the other and don't understand that there is a third option of not playing the control game at all. So,
non-compliance.
Yeah. And that's what the middle way is all about. That's what the middle path, and spoken of in many different traditions, is always about. It's about not being the controller, which is too left-brained, imbalanced chronically, and not being the willing slave, the one who is controlled or abused. And that's too much right-brained chronic imbalance. We need holistic intelligence in conjunction with the truly awakened heart in order to bring the dynamic of being able to walk in true care and true will, that middle path that doesn't play the control game whatsoever.
Mark, you've been bringing up something there as to, you know how we talk about info wars, right? And I think it's actually info hearts, because that's ultimately the thing that really seems to be making the huge, giant leap forwards in people's change in their consciousness. Is not their head, it's their heart.
That's right. Because ultimately, this entire dynamic having to do with freedom all has to do about what do we care about. What we care about is ultimately what's going to generate the reality. Yes, people have said, well, our thoughts become things and ultimately determine our reality, and that is true. But ultimately, the thoughts in conjunction with our cares, what we focus our attention on, is largely a heart-based thing. It isn't a mind-based thing as much as it is a heart-based thing. Our care is what's ultimately we're using to direct our attention. Do people care enough to become well-informed? Do people care enough to take in the totality of the big picture of what's really going on in our world? That's all care-based dynamics. And that's why you could say that this is a war over the human heart as much as it is over the human mind.
And that's we are being corralled towards the narrow bandwidth of sensory materialism over the big picture compassion and tolerance. You know, we're being locked into that sensory materialism because there we can be manipulated through fears like scarcity, shortage, loss, pain.
That's right.
Know, it's an over and over reinforcement of fear of loss and
That's
pain,
right.
fear of loss and pain, over and over again.
And the other thing that goes hand in hand with that is constantly pushing people toward this dynamic of service to self only. You know, if people would shift away from service to self only to service to others, but in serving others, you're also serving yourself because you realize you're part of a dynamic whole. You know, not to say I'm trying to emphasize collectivism by any stretch of the imagination. The more caring that an individual is for others around them, ultimately they're actually serving their own self-interest and becoming a stronger individual as a result.
Yes, I've said for a long time that I'm
so focused on service to self only that's perpetuating this dynamic that is ultimately leading people into deeper and deeper chains as a result of how their decisions are going against natural law and ultimately creating more of a situation of control for themselves and society overall as a whole. Sorry, Vinny, continue.
Well, I base my selfishness on my selflessness, if that makes any sense. Like, I literally do all this stuff for others, with the knowledge, not the hope, but the knowledge that in some way I'll be given something back. You know, I'll be donations, for example. You know, I'm doing a big drive for donations right now because I'm freaking broke. And I've been doing a heck of a lot more work than I ever have done. More guests, more content, getting great hits on the websites and all of this sort of stuff. And I'm like, great, I'm doing that. However, the reason why I'm doing it, the reason why I'm getting this selfish kind of, that's great, I've done something wonderful, is because I've selflessly gone out there and actually produced all this content with all these other people who otherwise wouldn't have it done.
That's right. You've spent your time to create, to put a creative essence out into the world for the benefit of other people. And I don't think there's anything wrong with asking for help. I mean, that's something I have a hard time doing sometimes as well, but you have to do it at certain times. Now, we had to ask for help with the For Your Mind conference with donations. I asked for help for What on Earth is Happening with donations to keep it on commercial free, et cetera, and for just general donations to help support what I do. We really can't be, gun shy to put the word out there that we can't do this alone or unassisted at all. And I think another way that people could help, even if they can't contribute in any way in like a financial sense or a material sense, is to help put the word out there more yourself. You know, take this ball and run with it. Don't wait for orders from headquarters, as they say. Just get out there and do it. That's helping all of us, you know. So whether people help in a material sense or whether people help in an informational sense, I don't think we should be ashamed or afraid to ask for help in a wide sense. Definitely.
Yeah. And just because you're not the one with enough money to donate or something, you probably know a couple of friends who would really love the show. Maybe they don't listen every day, and you just mentioned to them, hey, these guys need are calling for donations, bro, because they're really strapped at the moment. You reckon you might be able to help them out? You know, that's kind of a person-to-person advertising medium, and I've seen this this industry growing up. The new media is a strange kind of consciousness heart-based business model rather than an analytical profit and loss model, if you know what I mean. People buy and give things because of how it makes them feel, because of how they have an emotional attachment to say how much I entertain them throughout their day and help them keep themselves sane or whatever, and give them access to great guests and information, and it gives them kind of like a draw card, like, I'm your friend and I'm trying to help you, and now I need your help. You see what I'm saying? Rather than I'm a business and I'm trying to convince you that my product is good and I want you to buy it.
Right. And you know who's done tremendous work with this is Richard Wetherill. People should check out his work. He was a business consultant, I believe, in the earlier part of the 20th century, and he up through probably the mid 20th century, or if not beyond. And he wrote some books on this generosity, the spirit of generosity, and of operating within moral capacity in doing business with others. And he helped a lot of businesses turn their entire business model around because it was based on this total service to self and didn't have that service to other mindset in its game plan, if you will. And he wrote a few books on this topic. I know one of them that dealt with some of this was Tower of Babel. He wrote another one called Right is Might. I think people should check that one out. And then he had another one called How to Solve Problems and Prevent Trouble. These books are just phenomenal resources on natural law in general. He had a very deep, profound understanding of natural law and how it operates in our lives. And he was trying to help people to avoid self-inflicted suffering that comes from disharmony, from discord with natural law, with the cosmic spiritual laws of consciousness. And I think he's one of the people that really concretized this, crystallized it, if you will, into a system that is very easy to read, to understand for anyone, for even a beginner to these topics. So he's somebody I highly suggest, Richard Wetherill. Frater, if you want to continue to go down the line of discussing psychopathy, I wanted to maybe start telling people about some characteristics of it if they're not familiar with the term at all. Of course, they could do their own research, but that's something I definitely think we should get out there to
Could
folks.
I give an example on that exact front? I think it was the American Medical Journal in 2006 or 2004, I forget which. It published a little list of the symptoms of a psychopath and where they'd be. And a psychopath is a nice, charming, almost enchanting person, usually with a smile on their face, usually knows just the right word to say, and you kind of feel some form of devotion or admiration of them. But they don't have much depth to their personality. They don't have long-lasting relationships outside of a pretext such as a business relationship, and they don't ultimately care about anybody other than themselves. And the three most likely industry, the American Medical Journal states that you are to find such people is in entertainment, business, and politics. If you had to point a stick at the three main areas of our lives that have an inordinate amount of control over what we do in our daily life and how we think, those would be it. So it becomes no surprise to see that those power structures that psychopaths also love are very narcissistic. All psychopaths are narcissists, but not all narcissists are psychopaths.
Correct.
They love to see their names in lights. They love it. They love people cheering for them and clapping for them. They love to think of themselves as bigger and better than other people, that they're more important than they actually are. They love that. But also, they get intensely jealous and they hate anybody who questions that.
Absolutely. And Mark, I think it's a great segue to, if you want to continue to talk about the individual aspects. But the way I would like to frame it is thinking about it in terms of how it applies to the social dynamic today, because our understanding of the manifestations of psychopathy, if you will, and our social reaction to it, I think says a lot about how we've been conditioned as a society to respond to aggression. So if you could put it in that framework, Mark, that would be great.
Yeah, see, most people think that a psychopath is only a killer. You ask people, what is a psychopath? And, they'll think a murderer of some kind. Psychopaths aren't necessarily murderers. Psychopaths are people with, again, a completely inactivated or suppressed emotional capacity. They don't have the ability to really express a true range of emotions, care, or empathy to other human beings. That's what people have to keep in mind, that's really what this is. It is a disease of the psyche, and it affects the normal range of human emotions. So as such, I don't really consider a psychopath fully human, because they lack the actual characteristics that anyone would say defines what a human being is one of the defining characteristics of humanity. So psychopaths are aggressive to the point of violence often, but not necessarily. Sometimes they will use tactics that can avoid violence to get their way, but they most often will be willing to engage in violence if they are not being given what they want. They have a total absence of conscience. That's the number one thing to keep in mind. They don't care about the difference between right and wrong.
Oh, can I illustrate that?
They're not interested. Yes.
When you go to sleep, do you think about a whole lot of things before you finally drift off, or is it instant when your head hits the pillow? If it's instant when your head hits the pillow, you're a psychopath. Because you've got nothing. That's where the conscience comes in, just before you go to sleep.
The institutions that you mentioned that are most likely to harbor psychopaths, I would add two of them that I think probably the biggest bulk of them are at that weren't mentioned in that article, and that's the police and the military. They probably have the highest instances of psychopathy. I would also probably add the medical industry, specifically doctors, can also have some of these characteristics because they have this God complex, many of them, and think that they, can never be wrong or their decisions can never be challenged. Education would probably be another one, but the ones that were mentioned, namely entertainment and politics and business, are obvious.
Now there's another statistic. There's another statistic here. I think you're 11 times more likely to be killed by a doctor. I think than many. What was the other factor? I forget what it is. But if you have MD, no. Here's what it is. If you have the letters MD after your name, you are 11 times more likely to be a psychopathic serial killer. Welcome back to the second part of the show with my very special guest Mark Passio and my co-host on the Dark Occulted Mysticism show, Frater X. And just wanted to get out your websites as well. Mine is thevinnieeastwoodshow.com. That's Vinnie with a Y because it's the most important question. And Eastwood as in go ahead, make my news. And Mark Passio is from whatonearthishappening.com. And Frater X is at the middlechamberfx.wordpress.com.
And there's also freeyourmindconference.com. People should go check out freeyourmindconference.com. And just to make a official plug on that, we were talking earlier about asking for help and raising funds, and with the Free Your Mind conference, the great thing we have set up now is those tickets are already on sale, and purchasing advance tickets to the Free Your Mind conference is literally better than a donation because you actually get admission to the 3-day conference. So it's not just like you're just donating to a cause. You're literally, the money is going to the expenses, the logistic expenses of putting the entire conference on. And so that's why it's an excellent way to help support the endeavor, and you actually get to participate in the conference by attending.
Yeah, I think we have some of the fairest rates for a conference of this size and duration. And, people have to realize how much of an effort and how much money it takes to gather that many individuals from all over the country. I mean, these people are from, disparate places in the country, and to pay for all of their airfare and lodging expenses while they're in town for the conference is very expensive. So a core group of individuals are coming together and doing that here in Philadelphia, and we definitely need the support of people buying tickets in advance really help us to cover those expenses. So thanks for mentioning that, Frater.
Now, going back to the point we were addressing earlier, and I remember maybe the first show that we did all together, I think we had Curtis Jackson, the Illuminated one as well. And
yes, Curtis Davis, yes.
Curtis Davis, sorry. And I came up with this realization that when people are into the occult, what they do in the conversation basis is that the conversation doesn't keep spurring on from one topic to the next. The topic will spur on to another topic, but then another person in the chat room would then refer back to what another person in the topic said to earlier in order to complete it. So it goes round sort of in a circle that keeps going up and up and up, like almost like a double helix strand. I think that's
spiral.
In a spiral, and it keeps going into different weird and amazing things, but usually arrives at some form of conclusion. So, during the topics of the show today, we've been talking about donating to us and our various specific causes, and indeed supporting the business interests and the real economy, essentially, as well as the predominance of psychopathy in controlling positions in our society. And we've also been talking about the occult world and how it tends to just simply do the direct opposite of what it says so that it can manipulate people into doing whatever its wishes are, believing that it's good for them when it's in fact intended to be evil for them. So we've got those three concepts. Now, how exactly do we tie them together? Because if we're talking about a solutions-based society or a world in which people take personal responsibility for the problems that they see around them, and how do they go and fix them? And again, that does come full circle back to pinpointing and pointing out the psychopaths and indeed the psychopathic structure, and refusing to either participate in it or refusing to put up with it by physically opposing it. Okay, so, you put yourself on the line so that you can take a psychopath out of a position of power that he uses to destroy people. So you've got to go to war, basically, against this type of thing, or you've got to go into retreat mode. Now, personally, I'd rather go fight tyranny and get rid of it so that it doesn't come to me where I've retreated to eventually. They will come for me someday. That's my perspective. There is no running from a New World Order psychopathic system. And indeed, we're not alone in fighting this battle for hearts and minds, as it were, because without our listenership, without these donations and people who purchase our books, DVDs, T-shirts, or whatever, our war effort would simply slump, and we'd wind up being exterminated in some sense of the word, and in some cases, literally.
I think what you said there is very important to understand. You can't keep running away from a problem forever. Eventually, there comes a point of confrontation. The people who founded this country wanted to escape from tyranny that was happening in Europe. And they wanted an ability to live their lives in a free capacity, to pursue their own religious beliefs and, to just live freely on the land. And the tyranny of the old world order, of the European order and monarchies, would not allow them the freedom to do that. So instead of choosing to physically confront the psychopaths that ran that order, they decided to literally attempt escape by crossing an ocean and then inhabiting a new land. But, we know that land was already inhabited, and it was essentially a conquest. We can get into the moral implications of that, but I want to just focus on the fact that they were attempting to escape instead of directly confront the problem where they were at. I think that has implications morally and spiritually, because we can't keep running away from the problem. We have to eventually either try to solve the problem or to confront it directly and say, we're not going to deal with this, we're not going to put up with this, it's you or me. I think a great movie that really highlights this from an allegorical point of view, and a great book, the movie is based on the book, is Kite Runner, The Kite Runner. I don't know if you've ever heard of it or checked it out, but it's a fantastic story about a child who grows up in Afghanistan and is sexually abused, and or his friend is, I believe, sexually abused, and he really doesn't do anything about it. He stands and basically watches it occur. He's too afraid to fight the psychopathic bully that basically attacked his friend. And, he basically runs. He runs away. He doesn't have the courage. He's too in fear and cowardice to directly confront what was going on. He eventually moves to America, and he, thinks, oh, well, the problem is gone now because I got away. I'm no longer there. I'm no longer around that dynamic. But really, the story is all about how the problem ultimately follows him wherever he goes. It's not going to go away. This is called the New World Order for a reason. It's a globalist thing. It's not. There's nowhere to hide from it. So escape is not really an option. People think that they're going to escape into the woods. Well, they have, all kinds of technologies for tracking and surveillance. And, living in the woods is not what anybody really wants to do anyway. That's not really an option for any kind of quality of human life.
Yeah, yeah. What are we,
We're
Robin?
the civilization.
Yeah, what are we, Robin Hood and his band of merry men?
Right. So I'm not about running. I don't think running is the answer. I don't think escaping from the psychopath is the answer when you're dealing with the narrow confines of, the geophysical localities that all the people of the world live in. It has become a small planet, so to speak, and there is nowhere to run from this. So the answer becomes, are you going to heal the problem, or are you going to directly confront it through some kind of forceful confrontation? And I personally have no problem with what the founding fathers decided to do, and what the Continental Army decided to do when those psychopaths crossed an ocean and came over here to continue to oppress the people that moved over here to escape that tyranny. They picked up arms. They took up arms against their oppressors and decided to do what they felt was necessary to do, which I've posed the question on my show, and I'm going to continue to take this question on my show for the next couple of weeks. Was that decision an act of love or an act of hate? And why do you think it was so either way, regardless of how you feel about that? I personally think it was an incredible act of love to do that because they were attempting to secure freedom for themselves and their posterity. They weren't going to allow tyranny to continue its encroachments against human freedom. And they decided that since these psychopaths would not back down, we're going to have to physically beat them back. And they did so. And not successfully ultimately in the long term, because, of course, they just came back in here and infiltrated the whole society and conquered us from within, or have largely conquered us from within. It's not over yet. But, when we understand what we're dealing with a psychopath, cunning thinking, complete absence of empathy or conscience, very adept at manipulating others, will engage in criminal conduct and violence to get their way, have a very deceptive ability to appear outwardly benevolent and make you think that they have your interests in heart when they absolutely don't care about you at all, a very deceptive ability to appear superficially charming in order to hide their selfish motives, the willingness to use intimidation and violence to control others, willingness to intentionally violate basic inherent human rights, total absence of guilt or remorse for any harm that they have caused, will rationalize their own behavior, will constantly try to lay blame on someone else, will deny their wrongdoing outright, total contempt for the feelings of others, will lie pathologically to get what they want. And here's the big part. They can feign normal human emotions. They're great actors. They're trained actors. That they grew up knowing that they were different than everybody else. And they literally practiced faking a normal human emotional response range so that they can make people think that they're just like them when they're absolutely nothing like them.
The real remarkable aspect of all this.
Can I say something just quickly?
Okay.
Those character traits that you listed there, that sounds like every employer I've ever had.
Because being the head of a business is very much taking on the characteristic or personality traits of a psychopath. It's having to get done what you want to get done, regardless of how anybody else feels. That's what a corporate structure has become like, and it's been accepted in the modern day as that's just the way things are, and that's how it should be.
I would say
people don't even give it a second thought.
I would say that's why I'm kind of phobic about being employed. I call it employer phobia. When I go into job interviews and things like that in any kind of corporate structure, I start to have a sort of a panic attack sort of thing, My mind and my body is just telling me, get the hell out of here, get the hell out of here now.
Well, you are inherently aware of the completely inequitable dynamic you've entered into when you get engaged in employment. Because me and Mark were talking about this before. Everybody who is employed is agreeing to let their own productivity be possessed by another, and they will compensate you for your productivity. They will give you an hourly wage for your productivity, for the power that you generate.
Right.
For example, when you work for a company or a boss, they give you like, whatever over here, average, say $10 an hour, right? Now, you're agreeing to that pay cut because really, if like, for example, in my field, they're charging $50 an hour for your service to whoever is paying for the services. They are like the middleman. The employer is just a broker. He's brokering your productivity to someone else and keeping the lion's portion of it and
That's
giving
right.
you a small amount as a compensation. And this is a completely backwards and inequitable. That's why you rail against it, because you naturally realize you're engaging in something that's completely, it's self depreciating. It's not good for you. You're not going to win.
call it-
If I may,
you
if
could
I
call
may,
it cre-
if I may, it's fucking beneath me.
Yeah, right. But Mark, you were probably going to.
That's all it really comes down to. You could call it creativity prostitution, if you like. That's really what you're doing. That's what we're doing by agreeing to that brokering, as Frater eloquently laid it out. That's what it is.
Yeah, a lot of people think if you work hard, you'll get wealthy, and it's like, no, if you work hard, your boss gets wealthy, and the rest of your wealth gets confiscated through taxation.
Right. By violence. That's another thing we have to really stress. The understanding of the difference between the right to use defensive force and something that is never a right, which is the initiation of unwarranted force, which is called violence. This is totally misunderstood in modern America and really throughout the world. People don't understand and have become so they have had the inherent right to use defensive force like bred out of their personality and bred out of their psyche through incrementalism, through people thinking that, well, you can't respond to someone's violent behavior with forceful behavior of your own to counteract that. Everybody is told that that is wrong and that's not a right, and that it doesn't matter who started it. This is a big thing that's this phrase, it doesn't matter who started it, brainwashing is put into school children at a very young age through the social engineering and cultural Marxist run public schooling.
That actually happened to me in school.
Matters.
That actually happened to me. That actually happened to me in school. I used to be kind of violent up until the age of 15, and it didn't matter who started it. And that's something that I realized. I used to be a really violent kid, and then I stopped being violent because I had the realization that it didn't matter whether or not it was my fault to these people. I always got the blame.
Right. See, people have to
coercion.
understand.
It was deliberate.
The definition of violence is that it is the initiation or the starting of undue force toward another. And in the definition, you must have that term initiated or started, it began. That's what made it violent. I ask people, do you think that this is how the obfuscation of words and definitions comes into play as a manipulatory tactic or manipulatory method of mind control, okay? I ask people, do you think boxing is a violent sport? And almost 100% of people will say, yes, boxing is a violent sport. And by definition, that is incorrect. That is the incorrect use of the actual term violent. Boxing is not a violent sport. As strange as, that sounds to most people coming out of another person's mouth, that is absolutely true. By definition, violence is the initiation of coercive force against another, to coerce their will. So in the sport of boxing, I ask people, which boxer is having their will violated? Which boxer is being coerced against their will to participate in that activity? Have not both of them willfully, consensually agreed to be part of that contest of strength? It's a contest of force is what boxing is. Both people are there mutually by their own free will. Their free will has not been usurped or coerced in any way. And
When was the last
Don
time?
King,
No
unless Don
violence.
King is their agent.
Yeah, when was the last time you saw a boxer?
They may be
When was the last
financially
time you saw a boxer get smacked in the head and then go to the ref going, "He hit me"?
Right. But that's what Mark says is so right on, because what we're dealing with is that obfuscation, or that reversal of reality. We're taking going back to the initial idea of employment being something that is it's literally taking away your money, and in our society we are conditioned to we're supposed to respond with gratitude. You're supposed to be grateful to have a job. You're supposed to be grateful to be working, to have an employer. We're conditioned to be obedient and grateful. And I'll tell you, Vinny, and you could probably appreciate this, but there were many years there working in the Midwest where I had many employers say to me, point blank, that since you started working here, people have become more disgruntled and discontented. Before you started working here, they were completely okay. Now they want like benefits and all these like holiday pay.
They want to be treated like humans.
Freighter, you're just an ingrate. That's all it is.
Yes,
know?
you're
what
just
I want ungrateful to your masters.
Mark, I want things. I want entitlements. Like air and water and stuff like that. A living wage. I'm just like you said, I'm an ingrate. I want things. I'm part of that 47% that wants stuff. That was so crazy. I'm referring to Bill O'Reilly's commentary with regards to how Romney lost the election because there's too many folks out there. America's not the same. It's not the same America as when Bill O'Reilly was a kid, I guess. There's too many folks out there, too many Hispanics, he said, and black folks that want things, guys. Their entitlement is too high. I guess.
I think O'Reilly's too high.
Yeah, right. Exactly. On his pharmaceuticals, right? But can I bring it back, as we do, us dark occulted mystics, we bring it back around. I wanted to come back around to the point of that you made, Vinny, when you asked us.
I'm a light de-occultic mystic.
Right.
This sounds like the name of a board game, the Light D, or a brand of beer.
Yeah, right. There it is. It's beer, yeah. But when you were talking, Vinny, about what we should, what do we do with this? How do we respond to the psychopathy within, whether it be our own primary, secondary in our society? I think that we have a problem with the fact that some people with the dualistic aspects of human nature kind of bounce back and forth between normalcy and pathology, normalcy and, psychopathy. But
right. Hold on.
Varying degrees.
To hell with what everybody thinks. I know the truth. I know this particular person is a slime bag, and I'm going to go out and I'm going to bullhorn him and just go,
"You're a psychopathic slime bag piece of trash, and I will expose all of your scumbaggery."
I think we should do the whole show like that. That's awesome. But no. But one thing I wanted to, you're absolutely right. But there is a clear distinction on many examples. And in order to get to that place, I think the first thing you got to do is it's always about, orientating yourself, orientation, where you stand within this reality that we have, and looking at your own moral inventory, what you understand about right and wrong. Like you just said, Vinny, when somebody is a freaking scumbag. You're looking right at them and you're saying to yourself, it doesn't take more than circumstantial evidence for me on on some people. But what's the response? What do you do with that? Well, ask anyone where I live. If I walk into it, and Mark, and I know Mark can appreciate this, but on the everyday level, in the little village that I interact with when I go through my commerce daily, if I get burned by somebody, like if they treat me with disrespect or somehow otherwise indignify, some sort of a way in which they are rude or deprecating in any manner, I I don't go back into establishments
That's it.
where I feel
That's
I've
right.
been disrespected or you know, whatever. You have to take a stand. You have to say, you know, like,
You
look, I draw the
sever
line.
that tie. You sever
yeah,
that relationship.
that's right.
You
I
don't,
don't go back.
continue to interact. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Enough
You don't
people
continue to
took that
interact
stand.
until you don't continue to interact until they've pushed you into a corner. Okay, so first thing is, Psycho comes into your life, and you're like, man, he's a psycho. I'm never going to associate with him again. But then the Psycho keeps calling you, and he keeps harassing you, and then you're like, okay, I have to do something about this Psycho.
Yeah.
And so that happened to me one time, and I went down to his little business office, and I filmed him assaulting me and my mate. And every single time an activist gets recruited by this guy, often I know most of the activists in this country, and they'll say, "Hey, have you heard of this guy Tane Rakau?" And I go, "Yeah, here's a video of him assaulting me and my mate." That instantly identifies them to anybody on video that this person's a slime bag and a scumbag, and you can expose people just by filming them when they don't think they're being filmed. That's the psychopath's
definitely-
weakness. That's why.
Definitely one way to start to cut into the damage that they have been doing by exposing them. If we really look at psychopaths that never stop and just keep coming and coming, we're really talking about all forms of government. Government believes that they are authority and that other people have a moral obligation to obey their commands. You know, even if they're not doing anything that hurts anybody else or causes harm to someone else. There's so many nonviolent, quote unquote, criminals or offenders locked away, you know, in cages, behind bars, for never having ingressed against or incurred upon anyone else's natural rights. And that's unacceptable. And this is what the end of all government ultimately is, to take more and more and more control until you're controlling every aspect of human life. See, a psychopath is an interspecies predator. They're humans that prey upon other humans. And I've even said I don't even necessarily fully concur with that definition, because I don't even consider a psychopath a full human. You know, and the sad part about it is that while less than 1% of the human population arguably is primarily psychopathic, secondary psychopathy is much larger in the human
4%.
populace. I would say it's maybe even bigger than that, very scarily, you know, disconcertingly. I would think that the number is even higher than 4% of secondary psychopaths, meaning people who are engaging in psychopathic characteristics, personality traits, behaviors, because they have been culturally conditioned into that state of consciousness or lack thereof. And the number is large. And you see, psychopaths don't back down. They keep coming and coming and coming. Unless you have enough people who are willing to work upon them to heal them, which I don't know whether we have. I would like to think we have more people that are coming forward and engaging this topic and then really working with people to try to get them out of that mind state. It's very, very hard work it's the hardest work there is to do. That is the great work. That's the great work. Healing the mindset of me, and turning the mindset toward service to all. Service to not only myself, but to all, because we're all ultimately in this situation together. And if you want to, you know, use that generalization that we are all one, okay. You know, but the psychopath constantly looks to control and will continue to push people into a corner until there is nowhere else to run to. So I think that's, you know, going back to the founding fathers and what their decision was to fight back physically. I don't think we can ever really take the physical repercussions toward the psychopath if they refuse to back down, which they invariably do, off the table. That cannot be taken off the table. People have to understand what the defense, the inherent right of defensive use of force is, and understand that isn't violence. If I respond to someone accosting me on the street and taking out a knife and saying, "Give me your wallet, give me your clothes, give me your shoes, give me whatever valuables or money you have on you, or I'm going to cut you," and I take out a gun and shoot them, that wasn't an act of violence. Again, people have to understand the act of violence was committed by the person who initiated the aggression against natural law rights. That is where the violence took place. If someone responds to that with force, defensive force, that's not an act of violence, and there is no wrongdoing in it. And this is what's being slowly conditioned out of people, the understanding that you have an inherent right to defend your physical body and property with force, with whatever amount of force is necessary to stop violent incursion.
The one
Meaning
day,
whoever initiated coercive force against your will or your physical well-being or your property, you have a right to defend yourself against that. And the founders tried to encapsulate that. They tried to really hammer that idea home in the people. They understood that the only thing that stood between the people and totalitarian, tyrannical government was the right to keep and bear arms. And they enshrined that in the Second Amendment to the Constitution. Now, I'm not a constitutionalist. I'm an anarchist. I don't believe in man's law at all. But there are concepts and ideas that I can get behind that are put forward by the framers of the Constitution and those who wrote the Declaration of Independence. And there are great ideas within them, even though there are some other ideas I wholeheartedly disagree with, like the right to lay and collect taxes, which is a form of violence. Okay, so there's, things in these founding documents in this country that I can get behind and other things I will not. So I don't claim to be my belief system, constitutionalism, okay? I get behind the truth. I follow the truth wherever it goes. Okay, so I don't limit myself.
I'm sorry, Mark. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, continue.
I would like to just say at this point that, anybody that's listened to this podcast, if they like what they hear with Mark Passio, he always comes to the table with definitions, with root understandings of words and terms, and that's what I respect about Mark. His presentation of his research is always thorough. He's thoroughly vetted any of the concepts he comes to you with. He's backing it up. And that's, if anybody really likes what they hear, whatonearthishappening.com is the place to go on, what is it, Sunday nights at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time?
On Oracle Broadcasting, yes. And you could listen in through my website on the radio show tab as well at whatonearthishappening.com. Also, check out the podcast section, which has all the episodes I've done up to this point. I tell people if they want to know a good place to start, podcast number 1 and work your way forward. I've done 133 of them so far. This weekend will be my 134th podcast. Mm-hmm. I want to just briefly, when you talk about definitions and words, just read the Second Amendment to the Constitution and just help people to understand the spoken English of the day at the time that the Second Amendment was even written is somewhat even different than modern colloquial English. And many people will not really even hear the true meaning unless you very slightly rearrange the words. And then the meaning becomes very abundantly clear. And for anybody on the fence about the issue of gun ownership or self-defense through guns, I mean, you really need to understand the non-aggression principle. You really need to understand that that's what we are all about, not creating an incursion against anyone else's natural law rights through an initiation of force. In other words, don't start the problem, and then there will not be a problem. Don't start initiating coercive action against anybody else. But if coercive action is being initiated against you, you have a right to defend yourself. Inherent right, not man-made, but you have an inherent right given to you by creation itself to defend yourself. You want to call that force God, the creator, the unified field of reality, whatever you want to call it. That's where that right comes from. It comes from the moral laws of right and wrong. It doesn't come from man. So here's the text of the Second Amendment. A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, to me, that is so cut and dried and so simple to understand that nothing could be more in your face and completely easy to grasp. That being said, many people do not find it as such and want to open it to all kinds of different interpretations according to their whims. But the founders were actually very, very specific about this. If you study the Constitution, the word necessary only appears in the document 6 times. That's it. And in the other examples, they're talking about, what is right and necessary in an instance to get something done. Never anywhere else in the Constitution did the founders use the word necessary to mean a part of the body of people that would have to remain constant as a constant. Or never anywhere else in the document do they use the word necessary to define something that is needed for the maintenance of freedom. This is the only place they actually define that this thing that they're talking about is needed to keep a free state of being. That's what they mean when they say the security of a free state. And it doesn't mean just the state of Pennsylvania or the state of New York or New Jersey or Delaware, etc. It means to keep a free state of being for the people, a free way of life, that this is necessary to that. And they use that term nowhere else in the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution. And the word necessary itself only appears 6 times in the Constitution and only once in this particular context. So let me rearrange it a little bit in modern English, how it would read if we perhaps were to write it ourselves in modern colloquial English. It would read something like this. And this is where, because people don't understand what the militia is. They don't understand what a free state actually means. And they don't understand,
they probably think they probably think militia is the first name of the woman from the Addams Family.
They have this connotation in their mind that that it is some private group of people that is formed, like a club or something. And that's not what the militia means at all. If you rearrange it in modern English, it becomes self-evident who the militia actually is. And I'll read it in how we would phrase it in modern English, just a slight change in words. And then it becomes like so apparent that people are like, how did I miss it before, in the way that it was worded by the Congress when they actually drafted it into the Constitution. So we would write it this way today. Since a well-regulated militia is necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. See, then it becomes abundantly clear what was meant. And that is, this is exactly what was meant. They meant since a well-regulated militia is necessary to the security of a free state. All I did was add the word since, and I changed the form of the verb to be from being necessary to is necessary. That's it. Okay? So now who is the militia in this context? Since a well-regulated militia is necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Then who is the militia?
The militia is the people. The militia is the people. There it is.
Of course.
Self-government. Or no government, really.
The militia isn't any particular group. It's all able-bodied people living in this country who are able to pick up a gun and defend themselves, or any weapon, any arms. That's why doesn't just say guns, arms of all kinds, any arms, armaments, weapons, anything that you can use for defensive force when your rights are being violated. That's who the militia is. The militia is the people. So this is very misunderstood by people.
Well, I've said this I've felt this way for a while. Is that I want to be assaulted by a police officer unlawfully, just so that I could know what it feels like to physically fight back and be in the right against an authority figure abusing their power. And I would want to do something horrible to them, like I would kick them in the balls, or I would gouge one of their eyeballs out, or I would bite off one of their ears, something that permanently disables or disfigures them for the rest of their life, as a constant reminder not to mess with people if they don't have a good enough reason.
Well,
I want to be the person that says we should take the higher moral road than that, But when I really hear the passion behind doing what is right, getting behind when somebody is committing a wrong in front of you, I don't think we should stand there with a video camera taping it and watching it being done as if we're not participating in life, as if we're watching life on some little movie screen in our hand. I don't think that's the right approach. I think I much more align myself with what you just said than with so-called activists that take a camera to a protest and watch an innocent person being beaten and having their rights violated and get it on film. I almost don't even want to attend protests for that reason, because there's not enough people who will physically respond with defensive force when someone who is innocent and who has not aggressed against anyone else's natural rights is having their rights violated by a psychopathic thug of the state. I would not stand there and do nothing. But then so many people would probably stand back and, just get it all on camera. They wouldn't actually jump in to do the right thing, that I would probably end up going to jail for the rest of my life. I'll start attending things like this when more people have this vibe that you just expressed, Vinny, when more people are ready to say, we're not going to have our rights oppressed, and try it and find out what happens. Then I want to get behind that effort. See, when we're going to come to defend our rights with teeth, then I'm willing to get behind that effort. But right now, people are coming thinking that it's a good thing not to display teeth, to say, oh, we're coming and we're totally harmless. This is why the police think they can get away with anything that they're going to do to anybody else, because they think they can get away with it unscathed. When they start not getting away with it unscathed, they're going to think twice about coming to a protest and trying to violate people's inherent human rights to present a redress of their grievances. So
yeah, they don't.
That's
they
my
don't just
my
think they can get away with it,
take.
Mark. They know they can. They get
Right.
away with it every single
Right.
day, and it's because the movement.
Because we've let them.
Yeah, the
We've
activist
let them
movement's
do
been disempowered through social pacifism, through
Right.
embracing non-violent,
Non-compliance.
Yeah, well, it's non-compliance is one thing. See, I say,
See,
I
I agree with
I like
non-violence. Non-violence, I can get behind. I'm always non-violent. I
Right.
never initiate coercive force. People think of violence in the wrong way. If someone is coming against your rights, that's an act of violence.
Right. Yeah.
If you respond to that with force, you have committed no violence. See, this is why I do
in that
not
way,
agree with
in that
Gandhi's
way, let's
methodology.
take the Transformers analogy. Protect the Autobots and
Right.
destroy the Decepticons. Decepticons use violence. And Autobots use protection. That is not violence, what the Autobots are doing. It is simply preservation of life and what's right.
You're absolutely right. And what determines what is violence is the initiation. Who started it? Who started it? Who came against someone else's rights? And that's an act of theft. You stole something that which did not belong to you, namely someone else's right to exercise a right. That was their right to engage in that action that did not harm anybody else. And you had no right to take that ability to do that act from them. It's an act of theft under natural law. And responding to that with force is not violence. And I don't care what anybody says. If you think that when you respond to violence with force, that is also violence, you are incorrect. You are not correct about that. And this is what social engineering has done, as Frater has said. The social engineers have convinced people that there is no such thing as defensive force, that any act of force is violence. Well, violence is always an act of force, but acts of defensive force are not violence. And we have to understand that and make that distinction very clear in our minds. Otherwise, we're giving up a huge inherent human right that is the last line of defense between us and tyranny.
Indeed. Well, Mark, thank you very much for coming on the show with us today. Frater, do you have any final words?
I would say that that is a great way to end this. I think that is the main thrust of this conversation is, in general, we need to re-examine the words and terms that are used every day in our lives. And specifically, we need to look at the definitions of violence and acts of aggression and how they are applied in our social dynamic. What has been the fruit of the approach that we have today, which I would consider a blinded approach. There's blinders on. We have a very narrow a bandwidth of sensory perception and sensory materialism, and within that bandwidth is all these very specific misinterpretations of words. And I want to thank Mark Passio especially and specifically for his efforts to bring clarity, to redefine, which is not really redefining. It's actually coming back to the old definitions. So I guess we'll call it restoring the definitions of these words that have been co-opted and just discordantly reapplied in a false manner. So I really thank Mark for coming on as well. And again, everybody check out his website, which is whatonearthishappening.com, and thevinnieeastwoodshow.com. And my website is middlechamberfx.wordpress.com.
And freeyourmindconference.com, the Free Your Mind 2 conference coming up here in Philadelphia on April 25th through 27th, 2013. Gentlemen, I just want to say it's been a pleasure to be here with gentlemen of your character, because getting this word out is what we really need to do, and you guys do it like no other. So I thank you so much for inviting me to be on this fine show here today.
Yeah, we do it like no other, for good or for ill. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been listening to the Dark Occulted Mysticism Show.
What's that song you're playing?
It's Mariachi Mexico, otherwise known as Spaghetti West Auckland, by the Paquianchis. I see you and you're going far away to a little home, and I want to come with me, and yes, and you're a yes, and you're a yes, and you're a yes, Mariachi Mexico, Mariachi.
Edition of the Dark Occulted Mysticism Show, co-hosted by myself, Vinnie Eastwood, and my good man Freighter X over there with the beard and the glasses. And we have another man with a beard and glasses as well, who's our very special guest today, who is Mark Passio from whatonearthishappening.com, coming at us live from the fully Philly Masonic Valley of Philadelphia. Welcome to the show.
Vinny, it's great to be here.
Now, you're a man who is very, shall we say, clued up in the ways of what we would call natural law, and being a former priest at the Church of Satan offers a unique perspective on the world around us and how it's truly run, and such a fitting guest for the Dark Occulted Mysticism show that we've had him scheduled for a number of months to this point, and waiting it in eager anticipation. So is there anything else about yourself you'd perhaps like to preface for the audience who are not familiar with your work?
Well, I think as far as my background is concerned, that's really all the time we need to spend on it. I think you did justice in saying that the forte that I really cover is natural law, helping people to understand what the laws of that govern the consequences of behavior are and how they operate in our lives, so that we can make better informed choices to align our decisions and our actions with those laws, so that we don't generate self-inflicted suffering. I mean, that's
and as their own, it was really like democracy in action. And then to have a group of people willing to come and gather and talk about it was also extremely exciting, I thought.
The gentleman from Press for Truth, I think, did a great job on that documentary, and that's why I chose to screen it at the Truth, Freedom, Prosperity documentary evening last month, or earlier this month. I actually, yeah, that was at the end of November. That was November 29th. So I think they did a great job in really expressing how this is the new media, the open source media, the cell phone cameras or high-def cameras, and you streaming or YouTube streaming and getting the word out there without the totally controlled old school mainstream media that is bought and paid for, telling people what the globalists want them to hear. I thought it was refreshing to see that kind of like what I call it open source media out there covering this event and reporting honestly and openly to the American public and getting the word out there. Yeah. So, in that sense, that documentary was very encouraging. Mm-hmm. But I'd like to briefly go back to what Frater spoke about at the beginning, talking about, in general, the knowledge that we're bringing forward as part of Free Your Mind 2, this conference that we have coming up in Philadelphia in April. It is about the occult, but it's about bringing that which has been hidden, which, of course, many times I've endlessly gone over that the word occult simply means hidden from sight. That's all it means. It is derived from the Latin occultare, which means to hide, to conceal, or to keep. Really, what I consider the absolute essence of the bulk of my work. So that does sum it up.
Now, Frater, you yourself personally, we've kind of developed a sort of relationship with Mark as one who is very knowledgeable of the cult, much like yourself. And you get this kind of camaraderie, this sort of colleague status, even though you don't work for the same organization, but you apply similar pieces of knowledge in different fields and, in fact, do events together and such, right?
Yeah, I guess it was 2 years ago now that I first heard Mark talking with a group, a panel discussion on another show. And right away, I could tell right away that Mark had a great understanding of the principles that are encoded within the Western esoteric systems. And the thing that I found remarkable is that he was not a traditional initiate as I had come to know them. He was somebody from a very different sort of background with his experiences. So that was really remarkable to me because he had such a grasp of this, and yet it was coming from a different angle, and yet he had a very positive understanding, very proactive, solutions-oriented message, which is to me, very essential to the material. And Mark and I are both going to be speaking at a function that he had success organizing in 2011, was the Free Your Mind conference in Philadelphia. We're doing one April 25th through the 27th, 2013 in Philadelphia. And one of the titles of it is, it's Mind Control. What is it, Mark? Help me out, buddy.
A conference on consciousness, mind control, and the occult.
And that's the point that I wanted to stress, is that it says "and the occult" at the end. Now that might seem kind of remarkable to some people, sort of maybe even a little out of place, but in fact, no, because as we're looking at it, it is from this angle of a positive application of the wisdom and the system encoded within, that I believe, and I'm sure Mark would agree, but I'll let him speak for himself, I believe is the epitome of how the dark occulted mysticism in our world, the globalists, have taken these and reapplied them in a negative and used them to captivate everyone, to, if you will, enchant the world. It's the same principles, it's just being applied with a negative intent. And
That's exactly
so
right.
that's what I picked up on with Mark. He definitely had a really powerful grasp of the material. And so, yeah, you're right. We kind of have, sort of gotten together on a couple of different projects. We hope to get together on a couple more in the future. The Free Your Mind Conference is one of them. I also spent some time in Philadelphia last weekend. I went with Mark to the Truth, Freedom, Prosperity documentary discussion group. And that was really interesting because it was a chance to meet with folks, and we watched an hour-long documentary dealing with the Bilderberg, which the subject matter. It's a movie called The Turning Point. It's a new media discussion concerning, I mean, basically it was exciting because it had 20 different media sources all outside the Bilderberg from 2012 meeting, coming at it from all their own